Hey guys, welcome to this video on the layout of the English 2.3 exam. This is under the breakdown portion, which is breaking down the text. First of all, let's look at the general layout of the exam and what you'd expect when you open your paper. You'll be given three different types of text which you haven't seen before. One will be prose, then poetry, then a non-fiction text. Each of these texts would have a question which is designed specifically for it that you have to answer. We'll discuss more about this in the later tutorial videos. Since they are different text types, they generally have different purposes for the reader and contain different language techniques to add to these purposes. We will look at these in this video. So let's start with prose. A prose is any form of writing which uses ordinary speech or written language without a metrical structure. Basically, it's any writing which is not poetry. For this external, they usually give a fictional prose since they're already giving you a non-fiction text. Some examples of these could be an excerpt from a novel or a short story. The general purpose of the prose is to trigger imagination and communicate emotion to the reader so that they're able to explore the situation or story they're providing. So keep this in mind when you're reading your prose. Now we're going to look at things you can find when assessing for language features considering the general purpose of a prose. You can look for figurative language, which are techniques like metaphors, personification, or allusions to help trigger the imagination of the reader. You can also look at narrative perspective, so is it in first person or third person? First person could give a more personal effect, whereas third person can display all the different thoughts of the characters and the whole situation clearer. Sentence structure can also be prominent in prose, so think about whether it's a simple sentence or a compound sentence or any other sentence structure. What does this add to the purpose? Look at dialogue, which could also contain colloquial language, so that you can also use it for your answer. And lastly, some symbolism to add to the imagery of the text. Now we'll look at poetry. This is writing which uses aesthetic and rhythmic qualities of language. Some examples of poetry are haiku, lyric, and sonnet. The general purpose of poetry is to convey ideas or emotions in a beautiful and incantatory way so that the reader can appreciate the message of the poem as a form of art. Here are things to look out for when analyzing poetry. Poetry can be quite daunting, but it's perfect for finding language techniques because it's seeping with figurative language. It's always filled with metaphors and all sorts of emotive language. There are even times when the whole poem is one extended metaphor. Use this to your advantage when analyzing poetry. Another important aspect of poetry is the use of sound devices. These are things like alliterations, assonance, and even rhyme, things that play with the repetition of sound to emphasize certain words. Poetry also has a lot of repetition to also add emphasis. Rhythm is the main aspect which differentiates poetry from prose, so keep this in mind. This is what makes a poem incantatory and beautiful. Lastly, it also has some symbolism to add to the artistic factor. Thirdly, let's look at nonfiction. A nonfiction text is a piece of writing which is based on fact and accuracy. Articles, biographies, and reports are some examples of nonfiction texts that the examiners could provide you. With this, the main purpose of these texts are to present facts and figures. Basically, it's providing information for the reader. The hard part of interpreting nonfiction is finding language techniques. Here are some things you can look out for your answer. Take note of sentence structure, so look out for complex or compound sentences or any other type of sentences. Also some factual information, which could be quotes or statistics to show the information aspect of nonfiction. Look out for terminology or jargon as well, which is specific to the key idea the writer is portraying. You can also look out for contrast and even sometimes figurative language. So what do you need to know from this tutorial? You're given three different unfamiliar texts which are of different types: a prose, a poem, and a nonfiction text. They also have their own question which you need to answer. We've also gone through the general purposes of the three, as well as the language features you can find for each one to use as your evidence in your answer. But that's it for today's video, guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.